hello everyone. Welcome to the Equity and Assessment for Learning webinar series. We are excited that everybody is here and really excited for the presentation that's coming up. We are going to ask everyone to drop into the chat some information about you so that we can know a little bit about you. And I know that there's screen sharing happening right now, but you can feel free to wave hello, turn on your video, and paste into the chat. Oops, this one right here. So, oh, one more second. I think Jade posted something in the chat here. She posted who she is. Everyone's writing hellos.
Hi, everyone.
And go ahead and paste in the chat who you are, your name first, position, institution, where you are in the world, and what you do for work. I'm going to do the same. All over the US and the world so far. This is really cool to see. Just coming in hot.
Yeah, so fast we can't even read it. I see some faces and some chat faces. That's what I say. Great to see everyone in virtual land. So excited. Wow, I can't even read that fast. How about you, Dustin?
I'm trying to catch it. See Arizona, Albany. Saw Germany earlier, Minnesota, Georgia.
I saw Beth Covey Minor. Hi. Awesome. I guess we can verbally introduce ourselves as well. I am Jade Cainsley. I'm excited to be the co-chair of the NCME Classroom Assessment Committee. I'm also an assistant research professor at University of Kansas, where I lead the Equity and Assessment area within the Achievement and Assessment Institute Center for Learner Agency Research and Action. I also run my own educational consulting firm called the JC Research Group.
And hi, everyone. My name is Dustin Van Orman. I'm the co-chair of the NCME Classroom Assessment Committee with Jade, and I'm a STEM Education Research Associate at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington State. And I do research to support professional development and do research around equitable and student-centered instruction in STEM. And we're joined here also by Claudia. I'll let you introduce yourself, Claudia.
Thank you, Dustin. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all. I'm Claudia Rodriguez Mojica, and I am a committee member in this classroom assessment committee. And I am an associate professor of teaching in education in University of California, Davis, UC Davis. And there I teach and do research on teacher education and supporting bilingual youth in K-12 classroom instruction and classroom assessment.
So the purpose of the Classroom Assessment Committee is to enhance equitable and high quality practice of classroom assessment to spur communication, to spur scholarship and communicate around classroom assessment beyond the National Council on Measurement and Education, NCME membership, and by promoting classroom assessment research and practice to enhance the visibility and awareness of classroom assessment among NCME membership as well.
And this webinar is directly connected to one of the purposes that Dustin just shared, specifically to enhance equitable and high quality practice of classroom assessment. This webinar series is intended to be an opportunity for us all to engage with ideas about how to make this a reality in education. And I want to just briefly highlight that in fall 2024, about 1 year from now, give or take, we're going to have a classroom assessment conference. So please keep an eye out for a call for proposals to come out in early spring of 2024.
And to learn more about our committee, the members of our wonderful committee, as well as some of the work that we've been engaged with, I'm going to go ahead and drop in the chat a link so that you can visit our website.
Thank you, Jade. So I just want to give you all an open invitation as well to submit questions. We all are used to the Zoom world by now, so please feel free to submit questions using the chat. to presenters. And also, please, whenever a question is asked, we encourage you to participate as much as possible. Like I said, we're all super, super used to using Zoom now. So we would like to introduce Dr. Erin Furtak and Dr. Hosen Kang. If everyone can please give them a round of applause. Or a little, use your little emojis.
So I'll introduce them briefly. So Dr. Hosan Kang is an associate professor of science and teacher education at the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Kang studies the processes of transforming science teaching and learning at schools towards more equitable, just, and sustainable futures. In her community engagement partnership project, she works with teachers, teacher leaders, and students to co-design engaging and empowering learning environments with a specific emphasis on justice-centered curriculum and assessment.
And I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Erin Marie Furtak. She is a professor of STEM education at the University of Colorado Boulder. Dr. Furtak is a former high school science teacher who transitioned into a career studying how science teachers learn and improve their daily classroom practices through formative assessment, also called assessment for learning. In her projects, she has worked in long-term partnerships with teachers and school districts. And more recently, she has explored how families and students can guide the ways teachers adapt and design science classroom assessments that sustain students' languages, practices, and interests. So now we'll give the floor to the speakers of our event. Erin and Hosan will give a presentation around equity and assessment for learning, focusing on what these terms could mean, their own personal journey in and around equity and assessment for learning, as well as aha moments, both personally and professionally as educators and researchers. So please do welcome our guests, and I will be moderating the chat. Please do drop questions as they come up, and we will have Q&A at the end of their presentation.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think I will speak for myself, but I know Hosan and I are both honored and humbled to be joining you today. Thank you, Jade and Claudia and Dustin, for those really kind introductions. And I love seeing all the introductions in the chat here today. So we're just delighted to be with you. I'll start by giving a brief overview of what our plan for the presentation is today. I think Hosan and I will take about an hour, and we're going to start by jointly clarifying terms and conceptions that we'll be using today. And then I'll talk a little bit about my journey towards assessment for equity, and Hosan will share hers. We'll highlight a few takeaways, and then we should have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So as we get started, Hosan and I really wanted to say to you all that we've code planned and developed the presentation together. We've been working and collaborating together now for several years. I'm so excited that I get to talk to Hosan multiple times a week, usually. And it's just been a delight to be able to come together after writing and thinking together for several years to share our journeys with you today. So we're going to start by talking about how we want to bound the conversation of assessment for today. This is a classroom assessment gathering, and we're definitely talking about assessment for learning, although we also recognize assessment is often used to think about the learning that's happened at the end of a unit of instruction, or for moving on to different levels of educational attainment for accountability purposes. Today, we'll really be talking about assessment that supports learners and teachers in the classroom on a daily basis. We look at the National Research Council 2001 definition of assessment as an inferential process that helps teachers and learners look at progress toward meaningful disciplinary learning goals that are valued by the community. And specifically, classroom assessment is where Hosan and I locate our efforts in education and in equity in particular.
Hi, everyone. I'm pleasure to be here, and I'm going to continue the conversation. So before we jumping into the conversation about classroom assessment and equity, we feel it is critically important to interrogate what do we mean by learning something, such as learning mathematics or learning sciences, because this view on learning shape what we assess and how we assess. So what is conceived as a meaningful disciplinary learning goal? So for example, in the context of science education in the United States, the goal of science learning has been changed over the last several decades. Previously, science learning involved understanding the content and the process of science. Therefore, the assessment was focused on whether students know the content, for the most part, the content meaning the nugget of knowledge and the scientific process. With the advancement of research on science learning, however, in the new standard, the next generation science standard, science learning is now conceived as a changes in engagement in disciplinary practice, what is often called three-dimensional learning. Therefore, assessing learners' progress involves creating tasks for learners to engage in disciplinary practice. So as you see here, there's a multiple views on science learning, not just one view. And there's even multiple views on science, like what is science? The conception of a science learning that has been privileged in science, school science has been changed. Next slide. So this raised several important questions in relation to the goal of promoting equity, like who determines the meaningful learning goals and who is deciding what to assess and how to assess, and whose voice, experience, and language and perspectives are privileged or silenced in that processes. Like, for example, science education researchers are becoming increasingly aware of how learning in school has been traditionally been racially coded and cultured in oppressive ways for historically marginalized groups. So critical science educators point out the whiteness of science as it privileges a white Eurocentric ways of speaking, knowing, and acting and valuing over the others. Then what does that mean to privilege these white ways of doing and learning science at school? Who gets benefit from it? And how can assessment contribute to either reproducing or disrupting this inequity and injustice? So we think that interrogating our views on learning is critically important to figure out how we can bring equity in the classroom assessment. Next slide.
Hosan, I'm remembering we were each going to briefly say our names at the beginning, and I think I'm just nervous. So I'm sorry for messing that up. So we would like to point to the recent National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report, Science and Engineering in Preschool through Elementary Grades, which has this amazing subtitle, The Brilliance of Children and the Strengths of Educators, as our touch point for how we want to think about equity in our presentation today. And the NASM pulled or kind of adapted these approaches to equity from Philip and Azevedo's work in 2017. And they articulate 4 approaches to equity that Hosan and I are going to use to kind of locate and talk about our work in the presentation today. The first approach being what we're calling opportunity and access, increasing opportunity and access to high quality science and engineering learning and instruction through the design of tasks in particular ways or certain types of classroom practices. The second approach is focusing on increased achievement, representation with science, and identification with science and engineering. And then the third and fourth approaches talk about, first of all, expanding what constitutes science and engineering, kind of going beyond these kind of white Western ways of knowing and doing science. And then the fourth being seeing how science is linked up with and supportive of science and engineering, are linked up with and supportive of larger justice movements around the goals and interests of value to historically marginalized communities.
Mm-hmm. So those far, we discussed the heterogeneity with the conception of learning and also the conception of equity. There is not just one conception of learning like science in discipline, and there is also multiple approaches to equity. Then what is the role of classroom assessment in promoting equity? So these are the diagram. It's not a perfect diagram. I'm the science educators. I like to using the model, but I also acknowledge that any kinds of model, it has a limitation. But this is one way of communicating, visualizing the ways in which we're thinking about different kinds of view. So I feel this visual might help us to think about these complex issues. The first image is the most simplistic view on learning and potentially assessment. A learner is moving toward one goal. And in this view, the role of assessment and equity can be pretty straightforward and simple, like recognizing learners' progress toward that goal. In the second diagram, it recognized the learners bring very different background. They might start in a different place. So this diagram recognized that diverse learners from different backgrounds can take many different pathways toward the goal. The assessment might help to create and recognize these multiple pathways that learners can take, but the goal is still the same, the one goal. The third diagram, what we try to communicate is that not only learning takes place through the multiple pathways, there is also expansion of the learning goals and possibly co-constructed by leveraging the voice of marginalized community. And also it is not this decontextualized learning goal defined by the authority. It is also like make a tree, something that is important, meaningful to the community, such as creating more just and sustainable future. So like this is one version of thinking about different ways of thinking about assessment and equity. So depending on the perspective, we envision that the role and approaches of assessment and equity can be different. Next slide, please. So in this paper that Erin and I co-authored about 2 years ago, we integrate these conceptions and make two arguments to promote equity in classroom assessment at the time. And we would like to add one more idea, which was not explicit at the time. So first, we recommend considering assessment as a cultural practice. That means that we need to pay attention to what has been normalized under what conditions. It also means that we need to pay great attention to the power, how power dynamics plays out in the process of determining what to assess and how to assess. Second, we recommend considering assessment beyond a singular task. Instead, we need to attend to the process and the whole classroom assessment system. The third, we recommend attending to the role of teachers in designing assessment for an equitable classroom activity system. So we know this is a lot of idea. Hopefully in the following presentation, Erin and I will unpack these ideas more, and we decide to organize our talk as a form of telling a story of our journey. So we can include the lesson learned from our own work along the example. And we also hope to illustrate that the meaning of these three recommendations through the stories. And also we want to communicate that equity is not something that you can just reach. It is something that we should constantly be vigilant and need to working on.
Great. So Hosan and I kind of build on this shared framework to talk about each of our journeys toward assessment for equity. And I'll say at the beginning that this is kind of a version of the story that I've never told before. So I'm really glad to kind of walk this journey with you. And I have a map on here just to kind of indicate how the findings that I'll be talking about and kind of the takeaways from there, because I will be highlighting takeaways from my own journey, is definitely not a linear path and definitely still in progress. And I want to start by just acknowledging that while I'm kind of talking about takeaways that I've highlighted in my own work, this has all been done in cooperation and deep long-term collaboration with a lot of really incredible people whose names are listed here, and there are more. People who have come through our research team, amazing graduate students who have pushed me in my thinking, colleagues and collaborators at the University of Colorado, Boulder, and beyond, and some of whom are even with us today. And of course, the amazing teachers and district coordinators and administrators that I've worked with over the years. So I also want to kind of start with just a little bit about my own reflection on my own history as a learner and a person who has taken assessments and does assessments in school. Because we've come to understand, I think we're coming to understand as a community that when we're thinking about equity as it applies to classroom assessment, it's really important for us to be aware of who we are as the assessors, what our experiences have been in life, in school and assessment, and how that informs how we show up in school spaces and participate in assessment. So I was raised in a small town in Colorado. My father's a physics professor. My mother's a retired elementary school teacher. So I have maybe the least creative profession in the world as a science education researcher. I was I was into school, but I was not a very good test taker because I knew from a young age that tests didn't always capture all the things that I knew and I was interested in. And one of those things was horseback riding, doing things outside. I have two brothers. I have one brother who was just a stellar, amazing test taker, and growing up in school behind him showed me that the tests actually were capturing what some people knew, but not always showing what I knew was possible. I also have a younger brother who was adopted from a foreign country, from an Asian country, when he was a baby. And growing up, my own understanding as a white person was kind of constructed in a way, looking at how the experiences of my two brothers and of my older brother and I, who identify as white, was different than my younger brother. And I'm not here to tell their stories today, but I am here to talk about how these experiences, kind of reflecting on myself and my own pathways through school, really influenced the way that I showed up in my own classroom. And I still continue to ponder today how our school systems, and particularly how assessment, doesn't serve all learners in the exact same way. How this is gendered, how this is racialized, and trying to take that up in my own practice as a teacher, as an educational researcher. So I did transition into a career in education that was kind of led by looking at how we could do better in assessments, starting in my own classroom as a high school teacher, and then later in graduate school, and ultimately into a postdoc in Germany. And I kind of want to start there because this was the first time that I was really becoming not just a monolingual English speaker, but adopting language practices in another culture, speaking multiple languages, and thinking about how these were interactive with my own assessment practices. So as part of my research in Germany, I was working and teaching in multilingual middle schools, developing and piloting formative assessments around physics education. And this is actually a picture of me teaching a class during which I was very stumped as I was kind of teaching the lesson, and also simultaneously realizing how listening, interpreting, and responding to learners in classrooms was so interactive with my own understanding of language, and how my own understanding of physics was interactive with the words that I had learned as in a monolingual English speaking home to describe what I was seeing in physics. So I was kind of starting off by having students share their ideas around this task where we were looking at the motion of two balls to kind of highlight uniform and non-uniform motion. And I was all ready to talk to the students about how we use words like speed, which is distance, changes in distance over time, and velocity, which is speed with a direction or kind of a vector. And in the conversation with students, I kind of became aware that in German, the word that we use to describe this is Geschwindigkeit, which is actually kind of just velocity. They don't have a separate word for speed, or we weren't using it in this lesson. And this was really one of the first times that I was kind of coming to understand, as a learner, as a speaker of multiple languages, this interaction, and how when we speak more than one language, what an incredible resource and asset this is. And it allows us to look at science questions and science problems in multiple ways. And so kind of carrying these themes and these learnings forward into work that I have done and continue to do with Caitlin Fine, where we've started to look at how we can bridge across literatures on multilingualism, on assessment and classroom assessment, and in science education reforms, to think about how we can make tasks that better support bi and multilingual learners in our classrooms. And we developed what we call this SABLE checklist. It's a science assessment for emergent bilingual learners that kind of takes assessment task designers through these different categories of criteria that help us think about the kinds of questions that explicitly create space for students to share their own cultural understandings, experiences, and practices, having kind of objectives and scoring criteria shared with learners, looking at place, space, and interesting phenomena, and so on. And we provide kind of sample annotated tasks that are explicitly created to invite students to bring all of their cultural and their linguistic resources to their responses to these tasks. So we kind of, on a task like this, invite learners to define what warm drink they're making and then to draw models about how molecules in these warm liquids are moving before and after it's been heated. We provide checklists that are very much informed by the work that Hosun has done in her own research to help students show what they know. We explicitly invite students to write their responses in multiple languages, and also knowing that the work in this particular project was being done in schools where the most common language spoken in addition to English was Spanish, so also making translations into multiple languages. So this leads me to kind of the first takeaway that I want to highlight, which is the importance of recognizing the linguistic and cultural resources of learners and designing tasks that explicitly create space for them. The second kind of takeaway that I want to highlight today goes from or builds from a body of research that my team and I did for 10 plus years, where we designed tasks with teachers in long-term school-based professional learning and supported the teachers enacting those tasks and iteratively improving on those over periods of years. We have several research articles that we've published around this. What I want to highlight here is that looking back at that framework Hosun was talking about a few moments ago, we're thinking about tasks and classroom practices as really being interactive and working together to support learners in sharing their ideas and showing what they know. And that process, which we call the formative assessment design cycle, is I'm really coming to understand an approach for professional learning that is really intended to promote more equitable formative assessment in science classrooms, where we start by looking at what learners already know, their interests in linguistic and cultural assets. We co-design tasks with teachers that are intended to be interesting and that feature scenarios the learners are motivated to answer. We make plans that promote equitable participation for all learners, and I'll show you an example of that a little bit later. We enact the tasks with learners, and then we collect multiple forms of data to understand how the tasks are supporting learning. And then we come back together and reflect, revise, and plan next steps for instruction. And always asking this question of how can we do better next time? What have we learned as teachers about what our learners know and are able to do? And how can we better serve our learners moving forward? So this is an excerpt from a lesson that was taught in one of our partner schools just a few years ago. And I pulled this because I really wanted to, and particularly now, highlight how classroom practices really support students' engagement in kind of seeing themselves in science and seeing how their everyday experiences help them understand the science questions that we might be asking. This is a high school biology lesson that's about how cellular respiration works, and inviting students to think about why it's so much harder to run at altitude than it is at sea level. And we see the teacher, who is Mr. Riley, kind of picking up on how students are using particular words like how the air was light, and how we're thinking back to chemistry. How would we change from lighter to using words like density? Inviting students to reason about what's going on here in Colorado in our own community, and students talking about how air is less dense with oxygen, how people are used to having a lot of oxygen, struggle to get air into their lungs. And then we see the teacher asking multiple open-ended follow-up questions like, why do our muscles need oxygen? Anybody else want to add something, and really creating this expansive space that ultimately makes room for one of the students to talk explicitly about soccer teams and how the Argentinian soccer team is like one of the best in the world. This was even before they had won the World Cup. This was happening. And how when the Argentinian team goes to Peru, they're struggling because of the higher elevation, and it makes them harder to breathe. So creating space during formative assessment tasks where students are talking about things that they're interested in, things that they've learned outside of school in their everyday experiences, and how this helps us better understand what learners are bringing to the classroom and what they know. So the second takeaway here is to support teachers in long-term professional development to help them learn to listen and respond to learners' ideas and experiences, such as the one that I just showed you. At the same time, as we've been kind of working in partnership with teachers and schools, we acknowledge, and we've seen this over the years, that there can be what I'm going to call deficit discourses that come up when we talk about assessment. And I just want to name these, that we've seen them in places where we see lists of ideas that we don't want students to share in classrooms, kind of being posted on classroom walls, and kind of hearing things that are said about my kids can't do this, they don't know anything, they don't understand anything, it's all misconceptions. Once we started naming and listening for these, what I'll call deficit discourses, and in my work with Caitlin Fine, we're kind of continuing on this path of analysis, trying to understand how the way we talk about assessment is finding out what learners know, and then often we'll hear this gap language, which, as Rochelle Gutierrez has written about, kind of encourages us to gaze at the gaps and what students lack, which kind of leads into looking at what learners aren't bringing to the classroom, rather than focusing on the assets and all of the experiences that they have that are really interactive with the way that they come to know and do, and embracing these as fundamental to how we support learners in the classroom, and particularly in assessment. And so in our research, we have analyzed how we as facilitators kind of listen for and push back against these kinds of deficit discourses that come up when we talk about classroom assessment, kind of encouraging reframing about, rather than thinking about language as a barrier, thinking about how we can translate prompts into multiple languages, how we can encourage students to write in Spanish or in the languages that they speak, thinking about how this provides them with more access, and it actually helps us see even more about what they know and are able to do. And so one of my big takeaways then has been to really recognize and then challenge these deficit discourses about learners as they come up in assessment, and just to be vigilant and encourage reframing, not just in these conversations, but also in how we plan for and design assessments. Most recently, I published a book this summer with Teachers College Press about formative assessment and 3D science learning as supports for ambitious and equitable instruction. I want to thank Lori Shepard for writing the foreword, because I know that she's here today, and say that in this book, I talk about some supports that we've developed with teachers that help to plan for the enactment of formative assessment in the classroom around tasks. So thinking about how we're building classroom community in which students can share their ideas, how we're thinking about participation structures, how we're thinking about norms and routines, and how all of these elements work together to support the purpose of equity in classroom assessment. And we ask questions like, what are the kinds of questions we are going to ask students around this task? How are we going to arrange students? Are they going to work individually, or are we going to have them in small groups, participating in whole class discussion in pairs? What strategies will we use in order to be sure that we're providing learners with feedback that really helps them to advance in their learning? And how do we set things like norms and routines really around surfacing student thinking and having those experiences be relevant to the active assessment that we're doing in the classroom? So the fourth takeaway here is really planning for enactment, knowing that tasks alone aren't going to be transformative in the way that we want them to be toward these purposes of equity. How we really need to think about what are the spaces that we're creating for equitable participation and learning, and being mindful about that as we're planning the task. And then finally, in recognizing or kind of going back to these 4 approaches to equity that we've talked about at the beginning, I wanted to locate most of the work that I've done in the past as really only taking on these first 2 approaches to equity from this NASEM report and from Philip and Acevedo's work, as looking more at opportunity and access through the design of better tasks and classroom participation structures for the purpose of improving achievement, representation, and identification. And in my team's current and future work, we're really pushing toward expanding what counts as science and engineering and looking toward justice. And in the work that we actually have going on right now, and this is with Clarissa Deverell Rico, we've been working in partnership with the school district to actually talk directly to learners, to their parents, to community members and families about how they want to show what they know in science class by just asking them directly about science assessment and talking to them about what teachers say or do to support them in their learning. And we're learning from these conversations with learners and their parents, and then using those to design and inform professional learning spaces with teachers that are explicitly about creating more culturally sustaining assessment tasks. So this is our work ongoing that we hope is looking more toward expanding what these assessments are looking for in the first place, and pushing toward more just and equitable enactment of those tasks. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Ho-Sun for her part of her journey in assessment.
Erin, are you going to stop sharing screen so I can share my screen? Okay, so let me see, share the screen here. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Right. Great. Thank you. So I noticed that there's a lot of people who's joining later. So I'm Ho-Sun Kang, Associate Professor at UC Irvine. It has been my great pleasure and joy of working with Erin and learn together and from Erin. And also I wanted to say thank you for all the committees who invite us and being able to share our experience and thought. I also wanted to say thank everyone to be here together with us, because I feel like this work of pushing for equity through the classroom assessment is really challenging work. And I'm glad that we can be here together and think about these things together. So a quick introduction about myself. I was born and grew up in South Korea. I taught middle and high school science in South Korea for about 7 years. Now here in the US, I have been working with pre-service and in-service teachers for about 17 years. So my upbringing and experience in two very different educational systems is a great asset for me as a scholar and educator. More than anything else, my upbringing and experience helped me to notice and see the role of context in learning. And I know that how one can participate and engage in activities in a very different way, depending on the setting. Like, for example, I tend to be a little bit shy and quiet in most of the settings when I have to talk in English. However, I know I can even make a joke when I talk in Korean. So like I always align myself with a lot of students who have to navigate different linguistic, cultural, and institutional system. And my work is really focusing on, I'm committed to supporting the learners who's navigating a very challenging part of their life and the system. So in this talk, and I'm going to share 3 stories, and each story came from various research projects that I got involved in at different stages of my career. And each story illustrates how my work with assessment, either intentionally or unintentionally, foregrounds one of the 4 equity approaches presented in the early part of this presentation. So the first story is, the title is What is Assessment? This story is highlighting the first approaches to equity. So the context of this story was, it's part of my postdoc work when I started my postdoctoral researcher position at University of Washington. My job was visiting first-year science teachers' classroom and collect a lot of data just to understand how they approach the science teaching and how their instructional practice is relating to any part of the teacher preparation program. So I have this luxury of visiting many science teachers' classroom and observe what is going on in their classroom. And one thing that really, really stood out to me while I visiting so many science teachers' classroom, they are using a wide range of assessment, even though they are using the same curriculum. So here are some example of different kinds of assessment. As you can see, some of the students write a lot, and you see the variety of assessment and part of the data that I gathered. So I begin to wonder, why I'm noticing there is a wide range of the quality of student written explanations. And I also noticed that, teachers use very different forms of scaffold to design and support students' written explanation. So I begin to wonder, what is the role of this scaffold, and why some teachers in the first place use a scaffold, and what is the role? So I ask this question while I'm looking at the data: what type and combinations of scaffolding do teachers most often use when designing written assessment tasks? How does each type of scaffolding relate to the extent and quality of student scientific explanations? Do certain level of quality and combinations of scaffolding influence the quality of students' written explanations more than others? So I analyzed like 76 science tasks designed by 33 teachers, and I ended up analyzing a total of 707 copies of student work. And here's the two key findings from this research. With the effective use of scaffolding, teachers create better opportunities for students to demonstrate disciplinary proficiency. The quality and combination of scaffolding type matters more than the number of scaffolding embedded in the assessment. But from me as a researcher and educator, more kind of like big takeaway from this research is that my thinking or perspective about assessment, my thinking and my perspective about assessment learning has been kind of changed as I'm exploring this topic. So before then, I kind of thinking very simplistic way. Well, if there is assessment, then I can see to what extent students know something about what I wanted to know. So assessment is more kind of like a simple task. However, as I'm looking very closely and draw upon more sociocultural and critical perspective, I begin to realize that the particular design of assessment task provide a particular form of opportunity for students to show what they know and also who they are. So if I do not see what I hope to see, largely it has a lot to do with so many other things, including the assessment design and teachers' instructional practices, in addition to the learner's characteristic, what they know and what kinds of thinking that they have. So rather assessment to me come to be more kind of an opportunity than just a task. So this study really like opened my eyes, and I began to think really critically about what is the assessment. But this study is one of the study that is really well received by a lot of classroom teachers who wanted to provide a better opportunity. The takeaway from the equity perspective is that with a thoughtful use of a scaffold in classroom assessment, we can provide better opportunity for students to successfully engage in science. However, this study also kind of aligned with numerous prior research that is focusing on what is called the accommodation. So we have been done a lot of research around like how to accommodate the assessment for diverse learner to meet the needs. For example, like multilingual learners. But there is also the critique toward this accommodation or inclusion paradigm of equity. It is important, but it is limited. So then but I didn't really know what that means at that time. But here is another story that really opened my eyes, how and why this inclusion or access paradigm of equity is important but limited. So the second story is coming from the other project that I got involved with the other school district. The title is Why This Black Girl Received Zero. So after I moved to the Irvine, I started a school-university partnership with a Title I high school. And in this project, we are engaging in this cycle of co-designing and enacting and then analyzing what is going on in the classroom with collaborating teachers. So I leveraging all the knowledge that I know because I learned a lot about these powerful roles of a scaffold. So I feel pretty confident in designing well thought out assessment that use all kinds of amazing scaffold that I know. So we co-designed the assessment and we help teachers to implement this assessment and gather the data from the teacher's classroom. So in one of those PD, we look at the student work with these 4 high school biology teachers, and we are looking at the data gathered in their classroom. It was 2 white male and 1 white female teacher and 1 Latino male teacher, and myself and the research team. And before the PD, the research team select 4 samples of student work that showed a range of scientific explanations, so we can take a look at it together and learn something with the teachers. So we are engaging in the conversation, and then I ask, okay, so which one shows the most sophisticated use of evidence among the 4 samples of student work? But then interestingly, none of the teachers select a sample of student work that I thought showed the most sophisticated use of evidence. So I posed, all the teachers select 1 sample, but not the one that I thought the most sophisticated use. And I asked why. I think, what about sample B? I think the sample B has a really rich use of evidence. And then teachers go, oh, these students got 0. And that was a moment of pause for me. So how come? So these are the sample of student work that I select as the one that show the most sophisticated use of evidence. As you see here, the students are exploring, it's a context of evolution biology. Students are exploring what is going to be happen to the polar bear. And in 2020, they have to make a prediction what is going to be happen if the global temperature continue to increase, what is going to be happen to this polar bear. And kids are drawing animal in 2017 and 30, 50, and then they have to make a prediction. And you see some of the evidence of like checklists, all kinds of scaffold that are embedded in the design of the assessment. And these kids make a really strong use of evidence to support the claim, but teachers saying, oh, this kids got 0. So here's the part of the conversation. So they say, the reason why these kids don't get the point is because she said that the polar bear is going to be extinct. And for me, when I look at the data, I thought this is pretty, reasonable prediction given what is going to be happen. But then teacher goes, we specifically said not because their logical claim that if students say extinct, we didn't think we have enough to grade, then they wouldn't have to use the content. That's why we specifically say, do not say extinct. However, these girls say extinct, make a prediction of the extinct of the polar bear. And teacher B says, we can grade evolution if it doesn't exist in students' response. And teacher C, they don't show any content. And teacher and B say that one is an issue of not following the basic direction. And then teacher B said, are we grading their ideas or content? So to me, that was huge moment of pause and aha. Because for me, when I looking at just students' work, I thought students show deeply engaged in scientific science, and the students show the deep thinking around all this evolutionary idea more than any of the other students. But in this context of school science, she ended up getting 0s because she didn't follow what teachers expect her to do. And then the narrowly defined meaning of content that teachers looking for, which is mostly the use of academic vocabulary. So that was the moment of, to me, it was a huge punch. I still remember that was one of the PD that was most difficult to facilitate. And as you can imagine, after the conversation, the rest of the PD really didn't go. So I have to puzzle about these things, why these things happen. How was this possible to get 0 after showing deep engagement with science? And since I was in the school site, I knew these students, and it was one of the Black girl who wanted to help our research team to gather the data. And it happened to be hers. Why is it this Black girl? So that question really pushed me to think really hard about, just adding more scaffold is not going to work to provide powerful and meaningful science learning experience and supporting students to make a progress in their thinking, given what is happening in our current educational system. So I begin to think really critically about how to approach in the work of assessment and curriculum design. So I begin to thinking about how to expand what it means to do science and learn in science. So in the next project, as we are continuously engaging in this co-design curriculum and assessment, and one of the big emphasis that I begin to put forward is co-designing unconventional assessment in addition to conventional one. Sorry for the typo. So by unconventional assessment, I mean the forms of assessment that deviate from normalized ways of doing and being good at science in a particular context. So for the particular context that I'm working on in this school district, for example, in the context science, like claim evidence reasoning, CER was the form of assessment and expectation that teachers put forward, and teachers know in science, we are supposed to do CER. CER is the D science. So how we can go, CER is a really good practice, but how we can help teachers to go beyond just thinking about doing science in one ways of doing it. So, and for example, in physics context, while teachers are designing their curriculum and assessment in the context of momentum, we co-designed both what we call the conventional assessment, which integrate all this claim evidence reasoning format and all the scientific modeling. But in addition to these conventional forms of assessment, we also pushing for including unconventional assessment, like drawing a dream card that you wanted to give to the loved one and how you're going to protect your loved one safe in collision. Kids have to not only draw and write to the loved one while explaining all the safety feature, and then they can also using the language that they feel most comfortable that they can communicate with the loved one. So you can see the example of Spanish. The kids are using the Spanish to communicate the idea. So we studied about the role of unconventional assessment in this partnership project and analyzed a total of 76 students' work in 11 and 12 grader. And then the data include student assessment task, identity survey, and interviews. And here is what we found. We ran both qualitative and quantitative analysis, mixed method, and overall students' performance as measured by CER assessment was improved throughout the unit. And there was a statistically significant performance difference depending on their background variables only in the CER assessment context. And minoritized students showed statistically significant progress from initial to final assessment. And then later assessment context, what we call like unconventional assessment, students from a range of background performed similarly, and female students explained the safety feature of the car better in the context of writing a letter than writing a scientific explanation using the CR format. However, the data that really opened my eyes is actually more the qualitative data, because we also analyze students' experience, and we have a focus student. Her pseudonym is Courtney. She's a Latinx female student, and she shared her experience with this unit and different forms of assessment. And she is one of those female Latinx students who's scared to take high school physics class because she heard it's about physics and it's being about math. And there's all this dominant narrative about science and how students feel about it and have a difficulty in connecting those high school physics. And she also make a comments about this dominant paradigm assessment within that particular school site. She goes like, CR is just an assignment that every science teacher is asked to do at school. I'm not really a big fan of CR. I'm not gonna make a big deal out of it. However, she talked about unconventional assessment, drawing, and writing a letter to the loved one while explaining the safety feature. She actually received the highest score in her letter assessment, which is well matching with the quantitative pattern that we saw. And you see her comments, and more than, here she showed that she developed a new meanings as a physics learner, and she developed a new relationship with the physics and herself as a physics learner. One of the quote that I love the most is, she goes like, the last one, I actually learned more about cars in a way and how it would help me in the future with choosing a car. And physics is not only for us, but for the people. So she really thinking about physics in a very different way. So this second story episode illustrate how I come to realize that my approach to using more scaffold is important but limited. So there is a ways in which we can encourage students' representation and identification by using classroom assessment in a different way. And also that involve like really expanding what constitutes science and engineering. And assessment has a really key to pushing teachers to thinking about just normal assessment that they have to do in the CER, something that they're very familiar. But what else? How can students to show different kinds of ways of doing science, and what can be different ways of expressing themselves, still doing the science? So the third story is coming from my current project. The arrow is wrong. So I have to move to the justice. So we are trying to move toward, we are thinking really hard about how to bring justice at the center of our project and how the assessment can play the critical role in that process. So I am currently partnering with a progressive local school district, and the district has a strong emphasis on promoting equity, justice, and civic engagement. And one of the district policy with their commitment is this capstone project assessment. So all students are supposed to engage in this capstone project at the end of the year. And ideally, the district want that this capstone project is a place where students engage in civic engagement. However, when I started the project, I heard from science teachers and TOSA saying that, the science teachers really struggle to bring civic engagement. And in science class, science teachers think, oh, the social studies can do that, but I'm not really sure how science can do the civic engagement in the context of a civic capstone project. So I've been working with these 20 science teachers and helping them to design both curriculum and assessment in a way that promoting equity and justice and civic engagement. So in this project, the 5 teams of teachers developed this co-designed unit centering while we are grappling about this equity and justice. And you see the title of the big idea of those co-designed unit, but each of the unit must include initial, final, and capstone project. So here is my one of the aha moments, which is quite recent, and one of the special ed teachers. So at the end of the year, last year, we all shared what happened, my story about teaching of those co-designed unit, and these special ed teachers shared his story. And he co-taught this chemistry with another high school chemistry teacher. And he talked about his students' experience in this co-designed unit. And okay, so let me stop here. So there is a couple of things that I would like to highlight here.
Yeah, so
okay. So here is samples of samples work that Brandon shared with us with one of his students in his classroom. And he highlighted how much these students so well and participate in learning about this chemistry Haber process, and also share what he learned with the students' parents. So the couple of things that really came across in my mind, what I learned from these things is that how come the students with disability have never been a real science classroom before, despite that they are so capable of being science? So to me, this is the issue of injustice. How our school has been set up in a way that is continuously marginalizing particular students. And also the unit that we design is trying to attend to the issue of injustice while we are grappling with the question about environmental justice and climate change. So the chemistry unit was designed in a way for students to explore that topic in the context of learning chemistry. So our attempt to bring justice at the center of a curriculum, and also what I see here in this capstone project, how these students with learning disability is engaging in science, and also like revealing all the injustice still that is going on in the school, was really eye-opening for me. So still work is in progress, But the things that I learned is that it is possible to be part of a justice movement while with the science, while helping students do science. And also, I also learned the power of leveraging the district policy when district is on board of creating these kinds of assessment that allowed teachers to engage in different forms of assessment. It really opens up a lot more opportunity for so many educators who's just so dedicated to bring equity and justice. So we can do a lot more creative work. So that is the 3 stories that I have prepared. And in summary, there is a various approach to equity in classroom assessment. However, there's a consequences. So the question that I think we should ask is what kinds of equity approach we are signing up, we wanted to engage, and what is the consequences as we are making that choice. As I'm moving forward, I think it's not just one or the other. If I think about my current project, I still using a lot of a scaffold that I learned from my very first story. And I try to expand what it means to do and learn science by pushing teachers to develop more than traditional assessment that is expected by the next generation science standard. I also try to bring the justice, environmental, racial justice as a context to explore science, and also attend injustice that is happening in the moment of interaction and by the design of the school. So all these things, I feel that need to be come together, not just selecting one or the other. So we are bringing back this slide, which we share at the very beginning. Hopefully the 3 points that we made at the beginning kind of make more sense than before. And we have a couple last recommendations.
Yeah, so Hosan, thank you. I always am learning, and I wanted to just say that the recent paper that you were talking about is such a great example of how mixed methods can help us understand the interactions between how tasks are designed and what learners are doing. And so just wanted to plug that that's just an amazing paper that I continue to learn so much from, along with all of Hosan's work. And so as we were kind of putting the presentation together, we wanted to surface what we found to be some common themes across the journeys that we've shared today. And the first one is starting from this place of critical self-reflection as designers and educators. What I see in some educational spaces is that we spend a lot of time learning about our learners. And we say that, yes, that is incredibly important. And we also have to include ourselves as part of that classroom and activity system as the designers of assessments, as the leaders of professional learning spaces, that we also have to engage in these processes of critical self-reflection. As Hosan was just saying, we want to reconsider the kinds of questions that we're asking in our work in assessment for learning about what counts as equitable assessment, how these different ways of thinking about it are overlapping and interactive with each other, and how can we promote equity through thoughtfully designed classroom assessment systems. And this last one, I would say not just finding allies, but also being allies and co-conspiring to disrupt existing privilege, power, systems of oppression, and to look toward new possible transformative futures that imagine new possibilities for learning. And right before we, oops, can you change? I'm clicking. I realize I can't advance the slide. Thank you. And we were just talking as we all came on, as we were getting ready for today, we're so excited about how much conversation is happening about equitable assessment and equitable classroom assessment, even just this week in a lot of different spaces. And I wanted to mention that tomorrow I'll be co-presenting with Oki Lee a chapter on equity and justice in classroom assessment of STEM learning as part of a larger report that the Community for Advancing Discovery, Research, and Education release on classroom-based STEM assessment. And thanks, Dustin. We dropped a link there if you want to join us. It's actually tomorrow at 1:30 Eastern time. And I think that's it for today, right? I think we'll switch to questions now and conversation.
Thank you so much, Erin and Hosan. Can everyone, since we can see each other now, feel free to turn on your video, but also round of applause or whatever emoji reaction you'd like. I'm going to do this one.
I'm gonna make some applause audible too, Dustin, just because break up the silence. Thank you so much, Erin and Hosan. There's a lot of stuff going on in the chats. We have some great questions. Excited to kick off the Q&A for those who are able to continue to join us. For those who cannot and have to cycle off, please do join us for part 2 of this webinar series on October 3rd from 12 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. And if you can stay, please do. We're looking forward to having a really robust dialogue. So Dustin and Claudia, do we want to start with the questions in the document that we were compiling from the chat?
Yeah, so we had members of the committee grabbing every question that got into the chat, and we were on a mission to rank these in order, but there are so many good ones, I think it's going to be really difficult to do. So maybe what we could do is think about it in terms of the time in the presentation. And Erin and Hosan, maybe, I think this was a part of Erin's slide, the one around the formative assessment task cycle, design cycle for tasks. Could you pull up that one real fast and we'll just
Oh, I wasn't ready for that. Yes.
Sorry about that.
Give me a second.
So we had a question in here around are learning goals intentionally left out of the cycle? This was from Scott Marion. And then we had another question around success criteria being left out of that cycle.
Yeah, I saw that question. Thanks, Scott. And we totally talk a lot about learning goals as a first part of this process. I think I was actually kind of trying to balance how much information to put on this slide with kind of focusing on the theme for today, which is about equitable assessment for learning. But I think that in this first phase of the process, and actually throughout, we do a lot of brokering between kind of what the learning expectations are in schools and districts and kind of unpacking standards, but then also really trying to understand deeply where our learners are coming from and how those two things are connected. As these papers down here are about kind of learning progressions as a resource for doing that. And in our work, we're kind of increasingly working with other ways of kind of going directly with the learners that we have in our own classrooms to find out, like, what do students know and how can we create space to understand their interests and bring those into the classroom as well. So the learning goals are definitely there, and we're just kind of highlighting them. Or highlighting what the learners already know in their cultural and linguistic resources in this slide. But I also wanted to kind of bring in work that Megan Bang has done, because I know that she's on the panel tomorrow. And in this paper, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's next week, next Tuesday.
Yeah, or next Tuesday. Yes, exactly. So I'm sorry. Sometimes I say tomorrow when I mean next week. I always tell my students that they have to be prepared for that because I have trouble with the dates in my head. Sorry, but not trying
Megan Bing, go ahead.
Yeah, but I also wanted to bring in that some of the work that she's done with Carrie Tso and talking about the kind of analogy of cordage from and I know that Robin Wall Kimmer has written about this in Braiding Sweetgrass and thinking about how Indigenous knowledge and science knowledge can kind of be mutually supportive of each other. And so also in this context of our work, we're trying to think about how science learning goals and kids' interests and identities and linguistic resources can kind of intertwine and support each other rather than being kind of mutually independent and on either or. So that would be my response to that question.
I knew you would have a response. Thank you.
Maybe we'll kick this one to Claudia or to Jade. Which one would you like to ask from the list?
Claudia, I was trying to send you a message, but you're listed as Dustin. Dustin's coming up here twice, so I was trying to change
my link. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, so I can highlight the next question, and there's so many in here. Thank you so much for participating so much during the presentation. So I'm looking at a question about the am I pronouncing this right, y'all? The Sabel checklist, is that, or am I making that pronunciation
I mean, it's all made up, so. All acronyms are made up.
Great. Okay. So there were some questions about the Sibel checklist, and it was wonderful to see multiple folks hop on and quickly add the link to the actual checklist. And I was able to download it and save it myself as well. So I see a question here about the intended audience for the checklist. Sasha was wondering if it's for teachers, admin, assessment developers, or others.
So in the context of our work, we've kind of played around with it in a lot of different spaces. It grew out of wanting to have a resource to work with teachers in professional learning that made these kind of design criteria explicit. And we've used it as with kind of district assessment and science education leads, even in developing and thinking about interim assessments. And I always say that kind of gently with an NCME audience, because I always very carefully bound my work as being very much about the work that goes on in classrooms. But we have looked at how we can use it to support kind of tasks at a higher level, kind of outside the classroom as well.
So we have, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Dustin.
There's a bunch of questions that I think are going to launch pretty well into the discussion that we have next week. We have 3 panelists coming. Jade's put it into the chat a couple times. Please sign up for those because I think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. But we have, just for today, Erin and Hosan on. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about going back to something Hosan said around unconventional versus conventional. And I believe it was Carla Strickland here wrote, I'm struggling a little with what feels like the use of unconventional as a euphemism. If conventional is racially, culturally, and linguistically biased, then we should just say so.
So the term, I have been back and forth while I am going through the review process when I write this paper. Initially, the term was non-traditional and non-traditional. And the pushback that I got from the reviewers is that as soon as I say the traditional assessment, the reviewers, mostly I assume coming from measurement background, they think it's a multiple choice question. So any form of multiple choice, any non-multiple choice question is the unconventional assessment. So that's the way people tend to interpret when I'm using the language. So I realized that like I play with the multiple different kinds of language. I do hold the lead review about the performance assessment and traditional assessment, and none of the language is not totally satisfactory, and all the language has some issues. So I ended up using this idea about conventional and non-conventional assessment primarily because I wanted to highlight that there is a norm and certain kinds of norm that is constructed in a very particular setting. And we need to be very attentive to those things, like what has been perceived as a right or appropriate or good things to do. And if you are well aware of that, then we can think about then what is the other has been marginalized. So my attempt to more getting close to like third approach to equity, which is expanding the boundary of what constitutes as a science, leads me to choose the term like conventional versus unconventional. But I'm very well aware of that term. Still, it's not perfect.
I have a follow-up one with that, Hosan. Oh, sorry, Erin, I saw you were going to get in there.
And
Yeah.
ditto, I have a follow-up to the follow-up. Go ahead, y'all.
I think let's do the follow-up to the follow-up first.
I was just going to co-sign what Hosan is saying, and I'm involved in report writing with clients and colleagues, and we spent weeks going back and forth because there's traditional, there's non-traditional, there's situated, local. It's really interesting depending upon the audience, especially if it's folks who are coming from a traditional psychometrics background, what those terms mean versus folks who care about classroom assessment / assessment for learning and what those terms mean. But what happens when you're trying to write a report on innovative assessment? How do you, you want the audience to be, to bridge those gaps, but this is a perfect example of where the language is not sophisticated enough for us to be able to capture. And that in and of itself highlights inequitable issues, injustice issues in terms of the language that we use. So I appreciate you highlighting that, because I think for a lot of us who are trying to bridge that gap in terms of bringing the conversation out, but how do you even find terms to adequately describe what you mean? I'm sure that others on the call are not, we're not alone in thinking that and struggling with that. So that's all I was going to share. Go ahead, Dustin and Erin.
Erin first.
Well, I was just going to kind of link up with some of the work that Jennifer Randall has been doing in this area and the heuristics that she's been developing around justice-oriented anti-racist approaches to assessments that really start, like the first set of questions starting with who defined what this construct is, who was at the table when that was decided, and then how are we assessing it? And I just think that that's a really important resource here to name where the tasks are coming from, who's developing them, and kind of what assumptions were explicit or not explicit when those were being made. Thanks for dropping the link there, Jade, too.
Mm-hmm. Dustin, and then I see Lori Shepherd has a question. Go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah, I was just thinking a little bit around the examples that Hosan had around an unconventional assessment, and it seemed to me that these were focused more on connecting specifically to students' lives outside of school, connecting to, you know, leveraging what they know, trying to pull that out of something that wouldn't have been pulled out within the conventional, what was it, CER assessment, right? The claims, evidence, reasoning sort of format of assessment. And so my follow-up question was going to be to explain a little bit more about what the qualities of those kinds of assessments might look like.
So the first of all, you know, this what we call the unconventional assessment in the context, which we use the drawing and then the letter writing, is, I would say, go beyond simply make it relevant to students' everyday life. Because there has been a lot of critique about, like, you know, making relevant, culturally relevant, but, you know, toward what end? And so for us, this idea about it is going beyond just make it relevant, drawing on students' everyday experience, how to make it as where we're celebrated and then that can be sustaining. And they are engaging in science more deeply by leveraging those cultural linguistic assets. So that was the idea behind those design of those assessments. And then I kind of lose. What is your second question, Dustin? How?
No, I was just a question around what, I guess, what you would classify those kinds of assessments as being. And I think you gave 2 examples of those kinds of assessments.
Yeah, we were worrying about, you know, oh, okay, so then let's get kids to write a letter. We don't think that is what we mean by the unconventional assessment. The idea is that, yes, the quality, it should both unconventional and conventional assessment is going together as part of the classroom assessment system. And then we are asking students to explain how this car is going to be safe. So that need to be part of those letters. So we have certain kinds of expectation toward this creative task that we develop. So I using some of the website blogging, kids are expressing chemistry learning through while they're creating the website. Sometimes they're engaging in this video, digital story. It could be so many different forms, but still the idea is that how we are going to attend to this students' linguistic cultural asset and how we are going to create opportunity for students to leveraging those things to do science still in a meaningful way. So the task can be so much different form, but as long as we are attending to the norms of science, what it means to do science and how that is defined in this particular context and how we can broaden and expand those definitions, then I think that we are getting more close to what we mean by pushing the boundaries, and then this idea about unconventional assessment that allows students to not only express in a multiple way, that a lot of teachers easily agree with that, but, you know, not only like giving multiple means of expressing, but how we can even expand what we are looking for, like what it means to do science. Because I see that is the role of this unconventional assessment.
Thank you for that. Lori Shepherd has a question in the chat. Erin, I think you see it because you thumbs upped it. How do you hold the potential tension between avoiding deficit narratives versus learning progressions that move toward canonical understandings via multiple pathways? And although I think she directed it towards you, Erin Hosan, you can feel free to respond as well.
Yeah. Well, I can just start by saying that that's something I think about a lot. And I think that I think back to a workshop that I did with Kevin Kumashiro about 4 years ago, where he was talking about how we have these moments as learners where we all of a sudden start seeing things in a completely different way, and it just completely affects our lens that we go everywhere. I think about the analogy is like blowing smoke onto a hand lens that we've been looking through the whole time. And when I started noticing these deficit discourses in assessment, I can't unhear them anymore. And in the beginning, we used to kind of move around them and kind of ask questions and follow up and trying to help people reframe. And my team has gotten much more about now naming them when we hear them, and saying, like, that sounds kind of like a deficit framing, and talking about the consequences of having that kind of framing. Because I really appreciate Hosan bringing that word into this conversation. And I keep thinking about how consequential the way that we language assessment and the way that we conduct in the classroom every day is, maybe even more consequential than the kind of bigger tests that we focus ourselves on. And so the way I hold that tension is to first of all, to name it, and to talk about how, in the context of my work, the way that we describe formative assessment almost leads itself sometimes to a deficit framing, and how we can kind of name and reposition that. So if we say, here's the goal, here's where students are, and we want to help move them to this other place to support them in their learning. A person could say, here's the gap, and we want to know what this gap is. And we'll say, what we want to know is, how can we build from what students know to get them to this other place? And I think it's may sound subtle, but I think that always encouraging the kind of asset narratives of assessment rather than only looking at the gaps has been really constructive, at least in the work that I've been doing with teachers. So I don't know if Hosan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so thank you. I mean, this is a really great question and hard question to me. So I have a couple of thoughts. So I think it's important for us to remember that the teachers, even though they are engaging in the deficit discourse, they're also participating in these cultural practices. So like this deficit discourse has been dominated, and teachers has been exposed and grew up in those deficit discourse. So a lot of teachers, I never work with the teachers who wanted to do any harm to the students. Every teachers do their best to support their students' learning, but they are engaging in sometimes deficit discourse, because we are living in this very racialized society that normalize this deficit discourse. So how we are going to help them to notice and going beyond this using deficit discourse, which is really like thinking about this dominant ideology and the reframing, and first of all, recognize I am participating and engaging this cultural practice, which including deficit discourse, and how we are going to helping them to see that, and how we are going to helping them to intentionally move away from this deficit frame. So those are something that I'm thinking about. So I think we need to do some work in the pre-service teacher ed. So like the current paper that I'm writing is about like how to support teachers engaging anti-deficit framing. Is inspired by Nicole Lewis' work in mathematics. And in the work both pre-service and teacher in-service education, I think one thing that I try to do is, it is not about helping you to learn how to design the curriculum and assessment. If you wanted to bring equity and justice at the center of the work, it is about, becoming equity-minded educator. So I think if we are framing the work as more centering about identities and teachers' identities, so they can be more cognizant about who they are and what they have been taken as a granted, and how we can ask a question about all the things that they have been normalized. I think so really centering and creating space for them to do this identity work. And even though I have to point that out, that that is a deficit language. But a lot of times that if they're taking as a personal attack, then it's difficult for me to engage with them anymore. So if we can helping them, no, it is not about point the finger to you. We are engaging in discourses, how we are going to move away from discourse because we want our kids to learn and successful. So keep reframing this deficit discourse not as a characteristic of individual. It is a reflection of our participation in this large dominant cultural discourse. I think that is one way in which, for me, allows to having more open conversation and more likely teachers open their mind and also being more reflective about the kinds of framing that they automatically internalize and they're automatically just reproducing in their everyday talk. So I have been using multiple approaches, like they're using videos, helping them to see what kinds of language that they're using, or explicitly labeling and make the norm very clear at the very beginning of the PD, why it is important to move away and not using the deficit language and what is the deficit language. So that framing that we are draw upon is also important, because I feel the framing is co-constructed, not just teachers drawing upon their framing. So how we are going to also vigilant and explicitly engaging in anti-deficit framing as educator and helping teachers to co-construct more anti-deficit framing. So that is my current approach, but I understand it is hard and takes a lot of time.
I just wanted to say thank you. And Erin, it helps just when you said it's subtle. So I'm not guilty of acknowledging that I'm looking at goals and I'm moving from a positive understanding of what students are thinking, but with attention to what next. And by the way, Husan, I want to congratulate you on the pathways chart and the tree of many colors, because I think that actually answers the questions that have come up about more large scale and connections, because we need a more pluralistic understanding of each other, not just one child's cultural context. And I love the tree. Thank you.
Yeah, there's so many wonderful things that Erin, Hosan, that you brought out today, and I think brought us all to thinking about these issues in a different direction. Many of them swirling around in our heads still. And so next week we're going to have another conversation about this. And I know that you both, I can't remember if you both can attend. I hope you can. I hope the rest of you can as well. So just really quickly, put that inside of the chat. Thank you so much, Jade. One more round of applause, everyone, for our presenters today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Have a great week.
Have a great day.